This is part 2 of my chapter by chapter summary of the book Unrestricted Warfare. For part 1, see the link in the description below. Part 2, a discussion of new methods of operation. At the beginning of the 21st century, talk of a military revolution was everywhere. The Americans began selling their particular idea of the military revolution in a way no different than rock and roll and blue jeans. The American idea was almost entirely based on new technology. While technology is the starting point of a revolution, a complete revolution requires a change in thinking. New technology expands vulnerabilities more than abilities because it is easier to create new technology than it is to monopolize it. While new tech might allow you to detect new threats, it is harder to know from which direction you are threatened. The conflicts of the 1990s have shown that non-military conflict and non-state actors can be just as dangerous to national security as military conflict and adversarial states. National security based on regionalism has been made antiquated by globalism. Post-Cold War, the National Defense Reports of the United States began to list non-state organizations as increasing threats and recognized that interior instability was as concerning as external war. The traditional view of a nation's sovereignty consisting of territorial and economic interests is insufficient for the complexity of the current world. The interests of a nation exist on multiple planes and can only be accounted for by employing an extended domain perspective. A nation's interests and security concerns are expansive and often self-conflicting. Many pillars hold up a nation. This includes political, military, economic, cultural, diplomatic, technological, environmental, and resource-related concerns. A grand strategy must be created and pursued to holistically protect the nation. Infinite combinations of means and methods will diminish the importance of single threats while expanding the scope of warfare. Chapter 5: New Methodologies of War Games. As the world changes, so too will operating methods. The boundaries of the battlefield have become obscured, encompassing non-military means and non-military personnel. In order to succeed in this new environment, a new operating methodology, one that can coordinate many new operating methods, is required. Essentially, we need a method of methods. Visions put forth of future conflict are often cartoonish. Like science fiction, there tends to be an excessive focus on new technology, and this tendency was exemplified after Desert Storm. Despite the developments in American military thought, the fundamental assumption remains that conflict will always be won by the side with the best technology. Furthermore, conflict is assumed to be military in character. This causes the United States to use its strength in the wrong direction and prepare for a Cold War-era conflict, which will likely not occur. A technology gap between adversaries will actually encourage unconventional conflict and accelerate the occurrence of non-military warfare. The military has abdicated responsibility for this kind of conflict to other elements of the U.S. government, like the CIA. After Desert Storm, no sensible nation would engage the U.S. with military means alone. The post-Cold War U.S. military jumped at any opportunity to engage in combat and avoid becoming unemployed. The focus of the military remains conventional war, and it has difficulty operating in the space between peace and total war. The over 49 government agencies tasked with dealing with unconventional warfare, like terrorism, have difficulty coordinating and combining their efforts. As the calls to restrict conventional warfare increase, so too will the use of unconventional tactics. Every precept upon which the globalized world is built contains the seeds of its own destruction. The only way to expand victory in this situation is to expand the scope of vision. War threatens stability, and when people aren't engaged in warfare, they have historically tried to restrain it. There are an increasing number of treaties and agreements between nations to limit the types of warfare that can be pursued. Participants of Desert Storm perhaps boasted too early when they imagined world peace around the corner. There were plenty of examples of bloody regional conflict in the years after Desert Storm. Rules regarding warfare are typically only followed by nations when it is beneficial, and non state actors simply ignore them. Non state actors represent the antithesis of the international community and use the tools of globalism against the nations that championed it. Hackers use the internet, terrorists use international travel, and financial speculators use free markets against nations. The most effective countermeasures against the rule breaking non state actors likewise involve breaking the rules. Legalized assassination by the British Secret Service is an example of this. The use of combinations in warfare have always been an important aspect of victory. When combined, two complementary weapons can equal more than the sum of their parts, like peanut butter and jelly. The integration of command during Desert Storm allowed the U.S. to more effectively combine the strengths of different types of combat units. In addition, combinations of battlefield weapons, such as the pairing of UAVs and naval artillery, were effective. On a larger scale, the combination of warfare types, including economic sanctions, media manipulation, diplomacy, and psychological operations, made the fight between the coalition and Iraq like reinforced concrete versus unmixed sand. There are ever increasing ways to combine means of warfare, so the ability to create good combinations is more important than ever. The method of combination is addition. Despite the simplicity of this fact, it's still difficult for military strategists to learn how to employ additional methods to achieve additional effects. As the weapons, battlefield, and enemy change, a hybrid approach to learning and acting is needed to deal with multiplicity. The ideal general will add together the strategy of a media mogul, financial speculator, terrorist, and military tactician in a Machiavellian way. A number of strategists within the U.S. military have recognized that placing excessive focus on a particular kind of adversary can result in being defeated by an adversary outside of the field of vision. A focus on conventional warfare can result in a defeat by unconventional adversaries. With a limited focus, the military also limits its ability to combine means and accomplish its aims. According to an old Chinese saying, stones from other hills may serve to polish the jade from this one. There are countless means that can be classified as military, transmilitary, and non-military. Nations are already combining these means whether they intend to or not. The addition and combination of means has been largely made possible by the expansion of information technology. Methods of warfare have come and gone. Typically, a method disappears after its target disappears. A method of methods is required to utilize and combine methods effectively. This can be thought of as an empty basket where specific methods can be added or subtracted as needed. As Ye Fei, a military strategist in the Song Dynasty, once said regarding operational methods, the subtle excellence of application lies in one-mindedness. Chapter 6. Seeking Rules of Victory. The force moves away from the point of the enemy's attack. Victory in warfare is rarely clear-cut and easy to analyze. Despite this, there are still rules to victory, but their elusive nature makes commanders and philosophers equally cautious in claiming to have discovered them. People often attribute victory to fate, but the rules determine the victor like a phantom. The golden section is often observed in great pieces of art and in nature. In more recent times, the golden section has been recognized in certain engineering applications. The pervasiveness of the golden section and the limited recognition of it outside of the arts is possibly disappointing to God. The 1 to 0.618 ratio can be seen in weaponry, from the apex of the trajectory of a projectile to the arc of a cavalry sword. In ancient wars, the most successful formations and mixes of weapons followed the golden section. More recently, the turning point of the Eastern Front of the European theater of World War II was the Battle for Stalingrad, which occurred at the 17th month of a 26-month war. When the ground war of Desert Storm concluded, Iraq had about 60% of its ground forces remaining, which is close to the golden section. In addition to the golden section, there is the side principle rule, which is inspired by Chinese grammar. In essence, every word can be modified by another word. For example, good person, red apple, or precision bomb. Precision is the modifier, while bomb is the center word. The modifier word, or the side element, is victorious in that it changes the center word, or the principal element. This relationship, seen in language, exists everywhere. A country is made up of a government, which is the side element, and the people, which is the principal element. The government directs the behavior of the people. In a missile, the rocket is the side element that directs a warhead, the principal element, to the target. In the golden section, 0.618 is the side element and 1 is the principal. There's inherent asymmetry in this relationship. The side element is smaller, but shows that it is possible for the smaller element to control the larger. Whoever is able to define the side element in a conflict is able to use asymmetry to their advantage and subject the principal element to their will. Hannibal, while fighting the Romans, broke with a balanced formation and instead put his weakest units in the middle and strongest at the flanks. Hannibal's army gradually engulfed the Romans as the center of the formation collapsed, and he eventually achieved victory. Further elaborating on the side principle rule, the world is made up of all things and certain things. Certain things direct all things, as the side directs the principle. The side principle rule evolves throughout history as new side elements emerge, similar to Hegelian dialectics. In war, there are dominant weapons and all weapons, dominant means and all means, dominant force and all force, dominant direction and all direction, and dominant spheres and all spheres. Dominant weapons are increasingly systems of weapons rather than individual weapons. Military means will not remain the dominant means in the future. The dominant direction is the path of least resistance. In war, victory will go to the side that efficiently uses the side principle rule to identify the dominant and the whole. The existence of rules of warfare does not mean that there is a formula to warfare. Rules are simple yet have complex implications. It's most important to grasp the essence of the rule than to focus on particulars. Acting against the rules will ensure failure, and sticking to set practices make victory unlikely. Opportunities for victory present themselves, but they cannot be manufactured. The rules of warfare are best applied in a fuzzy way, and in a complex situation, fuzziness can help reach clarity. This understanding combines both Eastern instinct and Western logic. Chapter 7: 10,000 Methods Combined as One, Combinations that Transcend Boundaries. As said previously, knowing the rules of warfare does not guarantee success. Victory demands that a tactician understand the essence of the rules. Future conflict, with its increasing complexity, will make the task of achieving victory more demanding than ever. Truly innovative thinking will be required to win wars on the battlefield beyond the battlefield. What is needed is a military Machiavelli, who, just like Machiavelli in the Renaissance, was able to recognize the decline of the institutions of the previous age, like chivalry and knighthood, and adapt to the situation of the new age. In postmodernity, boundaries are made increasingly blurry by integration, so it only makes sense to go beyond them, whether those boundaries be physical, technical, or spiritual. Transcending ideology is the prerequisite to transcending boundaries. Going beyond boundaries does not mean using extreme means everywhere, all the time. It simply means selecting the most appropriate methods. In addition to fully opening the toolbox, going beyond boundaries allows for more effective combinations between methods, both military and non-military. The complete concept can be summarized as modified combined war that goes beyond limits. There is a kind of paradox in going beyond limits because the unlimited surpassing of limits is impossible. Beyond limits certainly doesn't mean no limits at all. Rather, it means going beyond the intrinsic boundaries in a certain area and combining means from more than one area. There are many limits to transcend. These include the limits of the nation state, the battlefield, and conventional military means, and the tiers of warfare. If a nation state is challenged, one should go beyond the level of the nation state and address the challenge using multinational, non state, and supranational means. The age of globalization is transnational, meaning the world is transitioning away from the nation state as a unit of human organization. However, it is still not clear if the nation state will lose its primacy and be supplanted by some other unit. The media is one example of how nation states are being transcended. Waves carrying television and radio signals don't pay much regard to physical borders. It's increasingly unnecessary to seize another nation's territory to compel them to submit to your will, and there is increasingly less acceptance for this kind of war. Saddam Hussein learned this the hard way during Desert Storm. When the territorial sovereignty of Kuwait was violated, the U.S. employed supranational combinations to address this national level issue. This included the coalition of nations to fight the ground war and the media war which was waged on television screens around the world. While supranational combinations are increasingly being utilized to address the complex issues facing nation states, they aren't new. Alliances between many nations during wartime is a common feature in ancient history, whether it be the Peloponnesian War in Greece or during the Warring States period in China. What is new is that supranational combinations are both horizontal and vertical. Horizontal combination is the inclusion of multiple nations, while vertical combination includes organizations above or below the level of a nation. During the Asian financial crisis in 1997, the American government, as well as American-based investors, multinational corporations, and international organizations such as the IMF, essentially waged a financial war on the formerly burgeoning Asian economies. It isn't clear how much of their actions were actually coordinated, but this alliance of interests was highly effective at bending Asian national economies to the will of the West. While related to the concept of territory, the word domain now refers to a demarcation in the scope of human activity. To go beyond the domain of the battlefield requires that one also go beyond the level of the nation and conventional military means. Again, the closest the American military got to super-domain combinations was the idea of full-dimensional operations, but this still lagged behind a complete understanding of transcending boundaries. Super-domain warfare is a result of the continually expanding scope of human activity. Understanding typically lags behind the phenomena. Historically, non-military domains were seen as accessories to the military, but now warfare has entered every domain. Future conflict may or may not occur primarily in the military domain. It may also exhibit low casualties but high intensity. A successful strategist will select the domain of least resistance and combine means from additional domains to achieve their aims. Means or methods of accomplishing particular aims can transcend their domain of origin. Means at one level can often serve the aims of multiple levels if creative thinking is employed. Technological development is the process by which humans expand their means of enacting their will on the world, and consequently, every expansion of means also expands the means of warfare. The Iran hostage crisis was initially addressed solely by military means, which failed. The U.S. then turned to non-military means, including economic and diplomatic means, which eventually succeeded. At the beginning of the 21st century, non-state organizations such as terror groups, international organized crime, large banks, and corporations recognized the increasing need to utilize super-means combinations to accomplish their aims, perhaps out of necessity. Nation-states were slower to achieve this understanding. The measure of a mean is not how well it conforms to preconceived notions, but rather how effective it is at accomplishing an aim. While it's tempting to use existing means, it's better to create new means by combination, tailoring it to the situation at hand and the aims that one hopes to accomplish. The usefulness of any single mean will diminish over time, and as the means available increase, so too will the possible combinations of means in an exponential manner. War consists of multiple tiers. The delineation proposed by the authors includes 4 levels: war policy, war strategy, operational art, and tactics. War policy is national to supranational, war strategy is national, operational art is lower than war but higher than battles, and tactics are combat actions on the most basic scale. This delineation is only put forth so that it may be transcended. Means at the strategic level can be used to accomplish aims at the tactical level and vice versa. Bin Laden used the tactic of truck explosives to achieve aims at the strategic level. This is a break from conventional warfare, where only tactical means could achieve tactical aims on the battlefield. The outcome of a war is determined by incremental developments. Victory in a war is a matter of accumulated victories at the levels below a war. If this is a rule of warfare, it can perhaps be bent through the use of super-tier combinations. Chapter 8. Essential Principles. Throughout history, military strategists from Sun Tzu to J.F.C. Fuller have conceived sets of principles regarding the conduct of war. Unsurprisingly, a change in the principles of warfare follows a change in warfare. Desert Storm saw the introduction of many new methods of warfare, which led some military strategists to propose new principles. One set of principles was the American full-dimensional operations. The principles that comprise the Chinese unrestricted warfare are laid out in this chapter. Unrestricted warfare isn't entirely unrestricted. The beyond limits combined war must follow the principles of omnidirectionality, synchrony, limited objectives, unlimited measures, asymmetry, minimal consumption, multidimensional coordination, and adjustment and control. Omnidirectionality is the starting point of unrestricted warfare. One must consider all the factors concerning the war and must be careful to avoid blind spots because the battlefield is everywhere. War occurs in natural spaces such as the land or sea, but now it is increasingly occurring in other spaces like politics, economics, and culture, as well as the technological spaces linking disparate space together. The principle of omnidirectionality is applicable to every level of war. Combinations of means should be established both within levels and between levels. No war will be fought in every space at all times, but it is important not to overlook any space. All directions should be considered. Synchrony involves taking multiple actions within the same designation of time. Actions are planned and implemented in multiple domains with a high degree of coordination. The principle of synchrony is similar to simultaneity, but perhaps more holistic in its treatment of time. Information technology and long-range weapons have shrunk the battlefield while also expanding it. Concern for physical space has become in many ways superseded by time. While conventional war was conducted in a series of stages in a campaign, now the entire outcome of a war can be decided in a matter of hours through concentrated and coordinated actions. By the 1990s, the U.S. military had already recognized this and proposed the operational ideology of the full-depth simultaneous attack, abandoning the combat model of sequential actions. Objectives in war should be limited in relation to the measures that are employed. Objectives that are not restricted in time and space should not be pursued. Limited objectives ensure practicality and functionality, and allows proper pacing so energy is left over to pursue subsequent objectives. The temptation to achieve a great success must be avoided because they are more often beyond one's abilities. Every achievable aim is limited in nature, and objectives that exceed limits typically end in disaster. Some examples of this include the Americans in Vietnam and the Soviets in Afghanistan. Based on the unrestrained geopolitical aims expressed by American leaders like President Bill Clinton, the authors compare America to a company that will eventually face bankruptcy. Unlimited measures should be employed to pursue limited objectives. This does not mean the unrestrained use of measures in an absolutist way. Rather, it means to use the best tool or the best combination of tools to accomplish the objective. As Confucius said, as one pleases, but not beyond the rules. Measures can be expanded, but not used with irresponsible intensity. Sherman is cited as an example of using unlimited measures to accomplish the limited goal of destroying the economy of the South. Asymmetry involves selecting nodes of action that run opposite to a balanced fight. This includes force disposition and employment. The axis of combat should be in one's favor, and the center of attack should be the weakest point. Asymmetrical methods have always been used by weaker states to contend with more powerful opponents, and the expansion of this principle today is seen in the tactics of non-state actors. Avoid head-on confrontation and attack the point least expected to be hit. Break the rules in order to use the rules to your favor. Minimal consumption means using the least amount of resources to accomplish an objective. It's important to note that thrift is not the same as rationality. The mode of combat will determine, in large part, the resource cost of an action. Totally expanding measures allows one to pursue lower resource consumption by picking the least costly mode of combat. In addition to rationally selecting the measures, the objective must also be rationally formulated to avoid wasting resources. The objective should be compressed, simple, and concise. The Verdun campaign during World War I was perhaps the worst example of minimal consumption because total war was employed without clear objectives. The German blitzkrieg during World War II is a good example of minimal consumption because despite the tactic being resource heavy, the aims were simple and easy to follow up on. This shows that using more to accomplish less can actually lead to success. Multidimensional coordination ensures all available forces are properly mobilized to accomplish an objective, whether in a military or non-military sphere. There are multiple spheres and multiple forces to coordinate at any given time. Coordination is not a new idea, but this aspect of war has expanded beyond to include non-war and non-military factors. Military factors are no longer guaranteed to be the most important in a war. The breadth and scope of coordination will depend on the size of the objective. By the beginning of the 21st century, there was an urgent need to learn how to utilize non-military forces, particularly how to employ intangible strategic resources such as geography, history, culture, and ethnic identity to achieve military aims. Further coordination between multiple levels of warfare should be a standard consideration. Adjustment and control of the entire process of war requires the continuous acquisition of information. War is a dynamic process and rarely fits into a predetermined plan. There must be allowance for feedback and revision as the war actually progresses. With the principle of synchrony, the process of adjustment can occur in seconds. Short battles can change the entire course of a war, and this may be increasingly true as wars become complex. Holistic adjustment during a conflict will become difficult. Despite this, the process of adjustment remains more important than new technology and new rules. In an unexplored battlefield, in an unfamiliar war against an unknown enemy, control of the process is still necessary to achieve victory. Adherence to principles doesn't guarantee success, but violating them guarantees defeat. While principles are essential conditions for victory, they are not the only conditions. In the absence of the principle that victory is certain, there are only essential principles. Conclusion. The period in which unrestricted warfare was conceived was defined by globalization and technological integration, and in many respects, these trends continue to shape the landscape. Entire civilizations are simultaneously fusing and clashing in endless ways. As the entire world is reconfigured, there is a widespread feeling of strangeness and placelessness. Traditional institutions and sources of authority are being constantly challenged, and the conventional unit of the nation state may no longer be the most important level of human organization. Contradictions in the concept of nationhood, as well as conflict between nations, will hasten the decline of nations. This tumultuous situation actually resembles the rise of nations at the end of the feudal age, where new powers contended with old for primacy. What makes the transition away from nations different from their rise is that non military means can serve to supplant military means. One need not copy Alexander the Great in loosing the Gordian knot by violently cutting it with a sword. However, the substitution of traditional warfare with non military means fails to be gratifying. As bloodless war supersedes bloody war, this continues to be the case. In a narrow sense, the battlefield has been constricted, but in a broad sense, it has actually been expanded. While casualties become lessened in conflict, they are increasingly caused by ever more complicated weapons and methods. Despite many developments, war is not going away, and this makes the study of war necessary. As Clemenceau said, war is much too serious a matter to be entrusted to the military. 20th century politicians have also proven that they cannot be trusted with the conduct of war. People have attempted to turn to technology to reduce the brutality of war. But like the battlefield, the brutality of war hasn't been reduced. Rather, it's been displaced to other domains and has taken on new forms. As the distinction between soldier and non-soldier becomes less defined, the question isn't who can be considered a soldier, but rather who can't be considered a soldier. The same line of thinking extends to the state of war itself. The issues surrounding conflict and competition in the postmodern age are interconnected and interlocking. To open the doors of understanding at all levels, at all dimensions, for all sorts of people, the concept of unrestricted warfare may serve as a well-formed key.